So here we are almost to the end of the semester. We're at lesson 12, so follow along with the PowerPoint here as we go through one of our last topics. So we're going to be talking about specifically building partnerships between the school, wherever you're working, and the families and communities surrounding you. And we'll also talk about addressing some difficult topics that may come up. So I've tried to narrow your task list down to a minimum here at the end so that you can have enough time to devote to your research paper and for the family involvement and communication plan project that we'll be enacting and talking about here in about a week on the 3rd, the Monday the 3rd. So follow along with me. We're going to focus again on partnerships, and what partnership really implies is collaboration. So we're going to be talking about collaboration in more depth and detail. So what collaboration kind of implies is that groups have common goals and serve the children in the best way possible. So when we collaborate, we all gather to establish what goals we're all striving for. That's a really important part of partnership on the school level, but as well as just the societal level. We have to be sort of aiming toward the same or similar things as everyone else in our group. There are three main levels of collaboration we're going to talk about today. Minimum collaboration, associative, and then on the decision-making level. We're also going to be thinking about collaboration in terms of having three main elements or components. That's planning element, implementation, and then assessment and accountability. So on the first of the three levels, the minimum level, this is really what describes a basic support for school programs. So it's good because there's support, but it's very much basic involvement. So parents help with homework at home. The community may advertise for school events that actually take place in the school. Parents are involved in different things like costumes for plays, snacks for events, different decorations for concerts, stuff like that, in addition to other things like fundraising. Now, when we're seeing parents and families become a little bit more involved, say on what's called the associative level, we're talking about teachers actually asking parents to come in a more detailed and more involved way to volunteer on a regular basis, maybe doing mentorship programs, organizing for other events, volunteering to being room mothers, room fathers, things like that. So they're a little bit more invested in the school. That takes more time, of course, and it ends up putting them in the school building or in places where school events are occurring more often. Other things that you may see is involvement in organizations like PTA and other things like that. When we get down to the level of decision making, this is when parents are actually a voice in the direction that the classrooms are moving. So this takes place with individual parents, business persons, professionals, and other community leaders. They are actively involved in the decision-making for the education of the child. So this is when parents are actually taking an ownership and advocacy of the children. They may be involved in things deeper than PTA, like school improvement councils or things like that. And it's really important to note that for successful change to occur at the school level, the family and community actually really has to be involved. So for children to see academic growth, it's been shown through research that parents and families and communities are actually a really vital part of their experience. And it's really important for businesses and other organizations in the communities to be involved as well. There's actually also a little bit of a danger with that, in that the people at the agencies that are supporting the schools might actually feel that they have more control over things than they actually do. And the way that our text talks about it is that the leaders in those agencies can actually usurp the rights and responsibilities that the teachers themselves actually owe to their students. It's also the case that teachers might be very hesitant to pass on the academic role of responsibility to parents and people in the community. Teachers may view them as not having the proper background or not having the appropriate experience to be able to give the guidance that the children might need. So that might be a hindrance to that as well. So we're talking now also about the three elements of collaboration as put forth in the text that we've read. So the planning process is one really important element. And this is just a stage at which team members approach each other and come together to just decide to set off with the mutual goal of working for the benefit of the children. And during the planning processing, they have to do things like set specific goals, determine the needs of the students that the goals that are set will be trying to ascertain, and then also, of course, design certain ways that we're going to strive for the goals, or decide what types of procedures are going to get us there. The implementation process is the second element. This is basically when we see how the rubber meets the road. This is when we're deciding what to do, what actions to take that will lead to the goals that were set forth in the planning meetings. There has to be priorities and an organization to how we follow through with some of the goal setting that we've set for ourselves, and it might even involve certain aspects of training or orientation. The final element of collaboration that we're going to cover, as put forth in the text here, is assessment and accountability. So we have to see how well we're doing. We've planned for the goals after we've established the needs of the children that we're serving, and we started to move toward those goals by implementation. And it's at this point that we assess our progress and then hold ourselves accountable for making the changes that will actually correct or reorient our trajectory toward our goals. So we see how well we're doing, and we review the products of our work, review the students' work, possibly even develop questionnaires to get feedback from community about the success of our programs. And it's really important at least once a year to make a formal report of the progress in any collaborative efforts made. This is helpful for the people involved in the collaboration, but it's also really helpful for people of the outside of those programs to see the work that's being done, okay, especially when there's a need for monetary assistance or support. It's really important to remember that the success of all programs really depends on good communication and monitoring of what's going on. Okay, so discussing with other team members of any collaborative effort, in addition to school administrators and community members, and then making sure that we're monitoring how things are going as we go. Now, the next several slides outlines some collaborative program models. Now I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. I'd like for you to just notice that there's a lot more detail to each of these programs, but they're just really good ideas that people have had in the past of how to integrate communities and families and schools together because of that benefit of doing so. So the first is Head Start. Head Start program enrolls a ton of people at the preschool level each year. It was conceived back in 1965, and it's believed that that in order for children to succeed, that it just really requires the involvement of parents and community. This Head Start program really sets themselves up with that assumption in mind. Their goal is to holistically provide a wealth of different opportunities outside of simply straightforward academics. So health and nutrition and economic counseling and so on. They really focus in on parenting, so they allow the parents to become involved and to reinforce the education that the students are receiving, mostly in these 4 ways that are outlined in the text here. So they allow parents to be partners. That means sharing decision making and planning. They let them be observers. That means that they're a part of the school, but observation is what they're emphasizing, so that they see how things go. They're going to be parents as learners, so they themselves are expounding their knowledge and richness of the content. And they're also going to be supporting learning. So this is like when they get home and the students are there, their children, then they're really continuing the education there at home too. There was at first a little bit of stunted research support for Head Start, but long term it's shown to have to be very cost effective and very beneficial. lowers emotional problems, increases increases the likelihood that students will continue in their following grades, so there's less repeating grades. And there's actually the statistics showing that there's less likely that as adults the students will end up in prison or in jail, so that's really important too. So there's 4 main features of the Head Start program: parent programming, focus program, workshop for adults, and extended day programs. So that's really what focuses in on allowing the students to be taken care of well past the dismissal date. And there's also social skills curriculum built into the programming. Okay, so moving along, the Reggio Emilia program was developed in northern Italy by a group of parents after World War II. It's a strong commitment for the parents to be a part of the educational process. This was developed by parents who just wanted to help their children grow as much as they could. It's a little bit similar to charter schools that we'll kind of be talking about a little bit later. Another model is the National Network of Partnership Schools. So this is a little more recently, in 1995. The ideas that's really emphasized here is a shared responsibility between parents, schools, and communities. So it's exactly like what our book has been outlining for us. There's goals and 6 types of involvement in your text. I'm not going to go over them here, but they're similar to a lot of the other programs here that it's just emphasizing the importance and different ways of making connections between these 3 groups: school, community, and family. Community schools as a concept dates back to about 1912. It's also sometimes called full-service schools. So this extends the education well beyond just classroom academics. So there's extended day services, there's school-based health services, there's more of a community focus and allowing the community to be a part of the child's educational experience. And then they, of course, focus in a lot on parental involvement as well. Freedom Schools is started off as primarily a summer program aimed at low-income African-American children that focus on literacy and cultural heritage, which kind of stands out from some of the other models that I've just gone over. Parent involvement is really key in this, and also using the neighborhood, similar to the last model, as a way for the children to continue learning in their own places. Okay, so they focus on social action and things like that in the communities and allow that to be very much a part of the curriculum. They focus on servant learners, is what they're called for. They're like interns or college-age staff members that are set to be caring nurturers for the children that they volunteer with. The Habla program, Habla of course means I speak or speak in Spanish, so this is aimed at, of course, bilingual cooperation, so that it's focused on a home-based kind of approach, so different instructors enter into the home, focus on reading and focus on play, and they focus on verbal skills, and they use the native language. Okay, so they use that as a part of the way that they make connections with the families. It's been shown to have significant benefits for both the child and the parents. So the parents are naturally involved in that, in the interventions and the resources that are being provided. It is, after all, they're at their home. So charter schools, you've probably known a little bit about. There's lots of different models of charter schools, so there's not just one type. They range from structured to more relaxed. The purpose, however, is pretty much shared. It's the decentralization of individual public schools. What that means is that it makes efforts for public schools in a certain community area to have more say in their own decision making. So to allow the individual school to make decisions for itself and for its students, rather than those decisions to be on the state or even the federal level. There's a mixed set of results for us in terms of research, but that probably has something to do with how varied the different charter school programs are. Most charter schools do typically have a smaller, friendlier kind of atmosphere, and the students do tend to get a little more personal attention. Okay, so we're going to shift gears here to finish up for this lesson, really to focus in on different difficult topics that you may find yourself having to discuss with families. First, we're going to talk about academic issues, a very common one to come up in schools. So some factors that lead to academic issues that you may consider are outright learning disabilities, difficulty in actually acquiring the new information, a lack of English proficiency, low economic status, as we've sort of talked about a lot, and how that impacts social and cognitive development, and also different things like cultural differences. There being some things that might fall through the cracks there that lead to possible academic issues. Also, gifted students who end up feeling very bored in the curriculum that they're in, or feeling like they aren't being challenged enough. That might actually lead to them doing more poorly in academics. So the effects on students who have academic issues. Behavior is a big one. So if they're not doing well, and especially if they know they're not doing well, then that may very well lead to some behavioral issues. Dropout increases greatly with academic issues. So they feel discouraged, they don't think they're going to do well, or maybe even graduate long term anyway, so the dropout rate increases a good bit. So some indicators that the student might be at risk. Social behavior. They might seem socially awkward or have difficulty in social situations. And they also may have varying levels of cooperation and levels of interest. And that actually goes either way. Cooperation, students may become more involved, more participating when they might have academic issues. It might be that they think that that's the way to get themselves going. And of course, may also be the case that they just decide to check out. They're not cooperative. They become defiant. They don't want to participate at all. Similarly, with levels of interest, they may seem very apathetic, very uncaring, partially because of the fact that they don't feel like they can catch up. They also might try to dive in and act very interested, even if they're not getting the information. Okay. Now, support for those with academic issues really needs to be a shared effort between the classroom teacher, the parents and family at home, as well as other staff members there at the school. So, talking about now social and behavioral difficulties. These might be a difficult part of a job of a teacher, is to discuss the ways that a child might be behaving that can be harmful or difficult for them or others around them. You could think of behavior or social difficulties as really being three types. One's externalization, that's outward going, right? Rule breaking, aggression, things like that. Internalizing is something more like anxiety or depression, withdrawal, somatic complaints. That means like hurt stomach all the time, headache all the time, things like that. And those are a little bit more difficult to spot. And then other problem behaviors are those that you might have a little bit more difficulty spotting, things like thought. So their thoughts might be going in much more varying and distracting directions. Also, their attention might have a very hard time focusing their attention. There's a chart on page 119 that kind of outlines some more detail of these three classifications. But here are some examples on the slide listed here. So there's like tardiness, talking out of turn, getting out of seat. Those might be more like externalizing behaviors. Things that I mentioned like depression or anxiety are more like internal. They also might have begin different habits like drug use or alcohol use, things like that. All right, so child abuse is a very, very difficult topic to work one's way around. There's a lot of good information in your text on table 5.4 on page 124, signs of child abuse and neglect. It's important to remember that you as an educator or anyone working with young children are going to be mandated reporters. That means that if you feel you have a strong suspicion of or observation of signs of abuse or neglect, you're required by law to report it. This does not mean you're responsible for proving it or that you're responsible for investigating it or inquiring or interrogating anyone or anything like that. It just means that you have to report it to Child Protective Services. Okay, so moving along to bullying. Bullying is also another topic you may end up having to have lots of conversations about. Something that is very helpful with regard to bullying is basically trying to find means of prevention. There's always going to be difficulties with children not mistreating each other, but when there's set routines in place during the day, it allows less space for bullying to take place, and that can be really helpful too as a means of prevention. Cyberbullying is, of course, something of a new phenomenon, so it's a little bit more difficult for you as the teacher, not being involved in, say, a student's Facebook account, if they have Facebook at a young age, which, they may not need it. But texting and video chatting and things like that may also provide means for others to be mistreated. And so that just basically might be good to remember so that you can keep an ear out for different things as you get to know your students. There's myths and facts about bullying also in your book on page 131, which I thought was helpful, so you should look over that as well. Your text also goes over a little bit about crisis response and communication. What I really like to emphasize about this section, when things happen in the school that are considered that's considered a crisis, it sets into motion a series of responses by the school team, the teachers and administrators and things, that are fairly unusual compared to the rest of the day. So a good example of that is how people communicate. So normally in a school you might communicate on the intercom or through phone or email, and those might not be available during a crisis situation. So one of the most important things of making a crisis response plan is communication and how one communicates in those crisis moments. And it's also good to plan for ways to communicate outside of the school to the families, to the other community members, to allow people to be updated with how things are handled. Okay, so what I'm hoping that you all are experiencing now is a very confident last couple of weeks, that you feel like you're ready to submit the last few things we have here. And even if you don't quite feel that way right now, you have this week to work on it. So I'm not asking you to submit any practice or demonstrate assignments for this week. I am asking you to be prepared for your face-to-face meeting next Monday the 3rd, and I'll email to verify times for that, but I'll just have to grab a room in one of the buildings, the education building, and where we will act out your family involvement and communication plan. So I'll act out as a parent there for a conference, and you will play the teacher, kind of guiding me through what that conference will look like. And I've given you that information from the last lesson, lesson 11. Also, your research paper will be due by the end of next week. That's the 7th, December the 7th, by the very end of the day. So if you have any questions about those things or any expectations that I have of, say, the research paper, you can ask me. But make sure you're following the APA guidelines, and you look up the syllabus for any other detailed information. Okay, so reach out to me if you need to through email or phone, and otherwise I look forward to seeing you next week and receiving your research papers to read over.